influences at the time, but just maybe to set up some context so everyone understands, because how many people are familiar with the CRADLE Will Rock? I'm curious. We don't have a lot of people that are familiar with it. Just in terms of what this was coming out of, the context and the influences, in terms of why he wrote this, what was happening at the time historically. We mentioned it, it's part of the Depression era. It was one of the federal work, it was part of Hallie Flanagan's, of the WPA, the Federal Theater Works Project. And
Hallie Flanagan, by the way, appears in the show. He changed the name of the character from a Nellie Vacuum to a Hallie Vacuum in dishonor of her. He was furious with her because he held her responsible for not standing up to Congress.
She wasn't.
But later on, 10 years later, they made it up, and there's a series of letters.
She was in a tough position.
Oh yeah, well, she was. She was really trying to do the right thing, but being hounded by congressmen who asked her things like, "Who's Christopher Marlowe? Is he a communist?" That was the level of education of the opposition. But well, Marc wrote this work in 6 weeks in white heat in 1936, following the death of his wife, Eva Goldbeck. Eva Goldbeck was a very prolific writer and translator. Among other things, she translated Bertolt Brecht. And at a party in early January 1936, after a translation of hers had appeared in New Masses and the Daily Worker, she invited Brecht over, and that's when Marc was working on these sketches, and he played them for Brecht, and Brecht suggested these that eventually became the CRADLE Will Rock. In the meantime, Eva was dying. She died of anorexia in May of 1936, and then Marc worked for 6 weeks and finished it. He then wrote the orchestration. That took a little longer. He auditioned it for a lot of different people, especially producers in the Essex House on 59th Street. He said, I called it my Essex House run. He would sing the part. He knew it all by heart. He could sing every part and do it for producers. And they all felt it was a little bit too avant-garde, or it was too racy. I mean, the character, major character was a prostitute, and politically difficult and musically difficult. But finally, he played it for Orson Welles, who really loved it. And then Welles got him to play it for John Houseman, who was a roommate maybe a euphemism, of Virgil Thompson, who later wrote a wonderful review of it. So that you can't do that these days, but in those days they got away with it. But Virgil Thompson urged John Houseman to hear it. I interviewed John Houseman after I interviewed Virgil Thompson in 1970 about this, and Virgil was really very ecstatic about Marc and about the CRADLE and other things. But Houseman said that his initial impression of the CRADLE Will Rock was it wasn't very good. But then I guess he was talked into it by Orson Welles, who was really enthusiastic about it. And
do you know if Orson Welles had done any? If this was really his first, had he done the Shakespeare yet? He had already done this.
The Black Macbeth.
Yes.
And he'd done Mercy's Hat.
So he was somewhat on the rise.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And Orson Welles used to take an ambulance from one part of town to another to do radio work and theater work. It was legal for him to do that, so he rented an ambulance to get from one part of town to the other. And he and Marc had a very, very special relationship, very close friendship. Before he died, he wrote a script about the CRADLE Will Rock, which was really about their relationship and how much they meant to each other. And it was never filmed. Tim Robbins used part of it, but mostly he did his own thing. But Orson Welles had an incredibly important influence on Blitzstein. Later he narrated the Airborne Symphony, which Leonard Lehrman also conducted in his premiere. Let's bring in Bernstein. Even before Bernstein. You know that at the Maxine Elliott Theater, they had very elaborate sets and costumes, and everything was ready to go. And then all of a sudden, Congress said that they were firing 25% of the WPA forced, and they were not opening any other productions until July 1st. This was clearly aimed at CRADLE Rock, which was supposed to open on June 16th. And they had their dress rehearsal, but then on the 16th they found the theater padlocked. And you could get in, but you couldn't. But once you got out, you couldn't get back in. You couldn't take anything out. In fact, Howard De Silva, who played Larry Foreman, couldn't even take his toupee with it. But somehow Lehman Engel got an overcoat and smuggled the orchestra score out. And Orson Welles refused to take no for an answer, and they found a way to do the show at another theater 20 blocks uptown, the Venice Theater, which had an Italian flag flying over it. And one of the first things that they did was tear down the flag of fascist Italy. Tim Robbins built a whole subplot around that. In fact, this is very funny. Howard De Silva, who played Larry Foreman, his original name was Silverplat. He was a very important Jewish actor. Well, somehow Tim Robbins thought that De Silva might be Italian or Hispanic, so he changed it to Aldo Silvano and built a whole family history about this family fighting between the fascists and the anti-fascists and how they came in and tore down the flag. It's very interesting. It didn't happen, but it's fiction. When my parents saw the film Cradle Rock, they said, "Now tell us what's real and what's fiction." So I'm telling you that that's fiction. But it's based on the fact that the Italian flag was in fact torn down at the Venice Theater before they started the show. And this audience and cast marched 20 blocks uptown to the Venice Theater, to go to the theater, and put the show on. This is the only time that there was a strike where the actors refused not to work, and the Actors Equity told them something which Blitzstein says on this recording. Marc Blitzstein discusses his theater compositions. He says that Actors Equity told them something which turned out later to be false, that the actors could not appear on the stage. And the musicians could only appear on the stage and would have to be paid double. So they decided they could afford one musician, which was Blitzstein. And he sat at the piano, and the actors went into the audience, and Orson Welles said, you cannot appear on stage, but there's nothing to prevent you as good American citizens from standing up and speaking your piece when your king comes. So that's what they did, starting with the mall. It was very courageous. In the movie, she's a waif, but she was actually published poet in the New Yorker. I mean, she was outstanding. And she started it, and most of the people in the cast were willing to take their lives and their living wages in their own hands and do something about this. Blitzstein said he played about 6 or 8 parts himself that night. And one of the people that heard the recording of this up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, was an undergraduate named Leonard Lehrman. And he came down and saw the show, fell in love with it, memorized the score, and produced not the first college production, but the first Boston production in 1939. When he was a senior, my father was up there, he was a freshman at the time. And Bernstein produced this at Sanders Theater from the piano, also taking a few parts himself. And Blitzstein flew from New York to Boston, which was kind of unusual in 1939. He took an airplane and made friends with Bernstein, and the two of them really became very, very fast friends after that, and did many things together, including the 3-penny opera, which Blitzstein translated and